to the Atheist Round Table. We just the dudes that you knew for poking holes in all these fables. Yeah. See, we're just some atheists that got questions like, why does God kill babies with cancer? Hopefully, you can bring some answers. We'll sit back and take notes. Go ahead. Welcome to the Atheist Round Table. Welcome to the Atheist Round Table. Okay. Turn it up, turn it up.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Atheist Round Table. As always, your boy Oz is here, and today I got Bryce Aroni with me. What's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Chilling. It's the freaking weekend. We about to have some fun.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it. Should be interesting.
Yeah,
Thanks for inviting me to do this too, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have a jam-packed day today, so this is round one, so to speak, and then tonight we have Isaiah joining us. He's another Christian, theist Christian. I always try to be specific there. He'll be joining us at 9 p.m. tonight, Eastern time, and then Thursday we had to move this one around, but Thursday 9 p.m. Eastern time, we're gonna have another gentleman. His name is Justin Joseph. He'll be with us Thursday 9 p.m. Eastern time, and it'll be Pastor Mike and I chopping it up with him. And the two claims for those are tonight is he has met Jesus, spoke to Jesus, and that's why he believes in God. And then Thursday night, that gentleman claims that he has absolute proof that God exists, and he's going to show us. So look forward to it, because we've been asking these questions for a long time now.
Yeah, I want that one. I definitely want to see that one.
So we'll have fun. But today, we won't waste any more time talking about the schedule today. I actually reached out to Brandon several months ago, and we're all busy, and then with COVID and everything, it's hard to connect. But we finally were able to connect and get a date, and here we are. It's the 2 p.m. edition of the TART live show, and we have Reverend Brandan Robertson on with us. So I'll let him do the proper introduction. So everybody will get Brandon on the screen here.
Hey.
Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing so well. How are y'all?
Oh, man.
Pretty good. Welcome.
Thanks. It's so good to be here. I'm excited to dig into these conversations with y'all. I can't make truth claims like those other two guests you mentioned, but I'm going to be interested to hear how they do what they do. So
yeah, no, but yeah, we'll have a great conversation today. And Brandon, thank you for hanging out with us today. And I think there's a lot of still interesting things that we can talk about, whether it's religion, faith, social, different social, humanitarian things that we can look at and discuss. So it should be fruitful. But before we do that, let everybody know about you, what you do. Do you have anything going on? Are there any channels or anything like that they can find you at?
Totally. Well, yeah, my name is Reverend Brandan Robertson. I used to, up until January, be the pastor of a progressive Christian church called Mission Gathering in San Diego. And after COVID, I ended up transitioning out of that to move back to DC, where I'm from, in order to work full-time doing advocacy for primarily LGBT rights, but also still continue to write and speak. And I have a digital faith community called Metanoia, which is a group of progressive Christians from around the world that gather to have kind of conversations like this. And people are welcome to join that if you're interested. We have a good number of agnostics and atheists that engage in the conversations with us. So you can find out more about that at metanoiacenter.org, or find me over at TikTok, where I spend way too much time. And my handle is Rev Brandan Robertson there. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. TikTok, it's two things. It's the it's the hole that sometimes you just can't climb out of. It just keeps you there.
Yeah.
But it's also the gift that sometimes never stops giving. Some of the things, and not just religion, but just some of the obtuse, random, wild shit that you find on that app is pure entertainment.
I'm never on there, so I guess I've been spared from a lot of that.
You need to. I mean, I can't get out of bed in the morning because I fall down the TikTok hole and sit there for 2 hours watching the most random things. But it's so life-giving. So
if that's how we want to define that.
Yeah.
So before we get into faith or religion or anything like that, Brandon, if you don't mind, let's get to know you a little bit. That we have a good understanding. Foundationally there. So, what did life look like for little Brandon growing up? Did you grow up in a Christian household? What did all that look like?
Yeah, great question. So I didn't grow up religious. I grew up in kind of a lower class community in Maryland. My parents, I would consider them, and they're okay with this language, they were kind of rednecky conservative. And so in my trailer park, like religion was kind of just assumed. Everyone believed in God, but there was we didn't go to church. We didn't actually care all that much about religion. But my dad was an abusive alcoholic. And when I was 12, I was just so mentally broken down by the abuse that I started going to a fundamentalist Baptist church with my neighbors. And it was there that what I used to say was I encountered Jesus and my life really was transformed. Now how I understand that is that community came around me and supported me and told me that my life had meaning and purpose and that I was loved. And so that really, it did save my life in a very literal sense. I was very, very close to suicide. And from 12 to 25, I entered the journey of studying to be a pastor. I worked at mega churches. I went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago and just kind of really dug into evangelicalism. And then it all shifted for me during college. But you didn't ask about that part yet. So yeah.
You're good. So there are a few parallels there from my background. Only I grew up in an extremely religious household, but once I hit teenage years, that's before that the abuse was occurring, but it wasn't until my teenage years that I realized that it was abuse. Like I thought just every household was like that, and all parents and all children had relationships like that. So there are some parallels there. So that'll be fun to talk through to see how one person get here and the other person get here,
and there's also some parallels with my youth as well, different parallels to what Oz was talking about. But, I grew up in a not particularly religious household. My parents are believers, but it wasn't taken seriously. I didn't spend a lot of time going to church or anything like that. I'm also LGBT. I'm bisexual. So, and I did find, or I thought I found Jesus at one point in my life for most of my life. So there's a lot of similarity there that I noticed with your story and mine. I didn't have the same kind of abuse issues. I had different abuse issues, but that's different. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah. So we should have some common grounds as far as, foundational pieces there. But you mentioned that you started, attending a church with a neighbor, I believe you said, and then you eventually found yourself in an evangelical church, because that's how I felt. I was like, how did I get here? What was it that caused you to walk away from that? Because I know how extreme that's what I was 100% indoctrinated into. So what was it that was kind of the catalyst for you to exit the evangelical part of Christianity?
Yeah, I think throughout my whole journey, one thing that I've always noticed is that I've been somebody who questions authority. I've been somebody who questions the boundaries that are drawn. And so it was probably 12 to 16, I was in a fundamentalist church. And I got kicked out of that church because I was going to the youth group. And at the time I had found, you might know him, Mark Driscoll on the internet. Who's this crazy right-wing, but cool fundamentalist. He cussed and drank and wore cool clothes. And so I was teaching my youth group Calvinism, and the church said, hey, that's heresy. You're not welcome here. got kicked out, ended up going to a more mainstream evangelical megachurch here in Maryland, and way more moderate. Like, they were actual Democrats in the congregation. It was majority of African-American church. And so that really helped begin expanding my perspective a little bit. But it was when I got to Moody Bible Institute to study biblical studies and to get my degree in pastoral ministry that I was in the classroom being indoctrinated with fundamentalism. And then I'd walk out the door, and it's in the heart of downtown Chicago. And so I would interact with Muslims and Mormons and Catholics and atheists. We would go to Boys Town to do ministry, and I would realize that these people that I was interacting with, they weren't broken, they weren't evil, they weren't like all these stereotypes that we're told about everyone else who doesn't believe like we do. And so I always say, when reality and your theology collides, your theology is what needs to change. And at the time, I had a podcast and a radio show on campus and had a blog. And so I started writing about this and doing interviews about the shift that was happening in me. And I started wrestling with my own sexuality and about whether or not I thought I could be a Christian and gay. And my college, they tried to kick me out 6 times over the course of 4 years, each time because I was asking questions. And they were afraid that I was being led astray. And not only that, but I was leading others on campus astray. And when I finally got out of Moody and graduated, I came back here to DC and just had like a summertime of wondering, why am I a part of this kind of religion that is so based in fear that just me asking questions, me being intellectually honest and curious was enough for them to say, you're evil. I mean, the words, we've all heard the kind of language that's used, demonic, Satan is influencing you. Yeah. And the rejection I got just for being honest made me really question whether or not I wanted to be an evangelical. And then the last thing I'll say that really pushed me out was in 2016, I was outed. In Time magazine, they did an article because I had a book contract with an evangelical publisher, and I had been advocating for marriage equality very publicly as an evangelical, and they canceled the book deal. So Time magazine wrote an article about it and accidentally outed me as gay. And the evangelical community, like the big leagues, the people that I admired, they came out and did radio shows. They came out and wrote a counter op-ed in Time condemning me as dishonest, evil, like all the things. And again, each step of the way, it was me embracing my authentic self and being honest. And every time I did that, I was met with condemnation. And as I looked at the historic red letters of Jesus in the Bible, like that behavior didn't square for me. And so I knew I couldn't remain a part of whatever that was. And once I was out, any opportunity to do anything in evangelicalism went away anyways. So it was kind of a mutual rejection at that point.
I have 2 quick questions for you, Brandon, if you don't mind. The first one is, you talked about the school and getting kicked out because you were essentially asking too many questions. Do you think that a school that kicks students out for asking questions ought to be called a school?
Oh, love that. I didn't realize it until after I got out of Moody. The thing I'll say that really will highlight that point is, to get into Moody Bible Institute, you have to sign a doctrinal statement that says you believe these things. In order to graduate, they make you sign that same statement, which when I did that, when I realized what I was doing in order to get my diploma, that's an indoctrination institute. It's literally, over the course of 4 years, you're not supposed to get any new ideas. You're supposed to go deeper in the same ideas and beliefs you came in with. And I walked away realizing that this wasn't education. This wasn't meant to be education. Thank God I had one professor at Moody who got fired later, who introduced me to postmodernism and all these external things that he wasn't supposed to be teaching. And so I got a bit of an education there. But if it wasn't for him, it's not truly a college. It's not truly an education institution. It's an indoctrination institution.
Right. And then my second question was going to be, you talked about the response that you got from the evangelical community after realizing that you were gay. Were you surprised by that response, or did you anticipate that the response would be something other than what it was?
I wasn't surprised. I obviously knew what everyone believed. I think what I was consistently, and have even to this day, I'm still surprised at, is that it's not, for evangelicals and fundamentalists, it's not just we disagree about this. It's a fundamental character attack. It was always, I'm a deceiver, I'm deceptive, I've been lying, I've been gay and liberal all along, and I've just been hiding it. And like, they have no ability to understand that I actually went on a journey and it was your own response to my questions that pushed me away. If maybe you would have done this, I mean, I'm glad I'm where I am today, but if they were a little bit more compassionate and open, they probably could have kept me in the evangelical world a lot longer. But the attacking of like the fundamental personhood is consistently surprising, because it's not what I will say this, it's not what they actually preach in the churches. There is this love your neighbor message, and I think that hypocrisy of not actually loving me, even though I was just being honest, is what really made me cynical and what really made me conclude that evangelicalism wasn't worth saving.
No, great questions, Bryce. Great answers. And to kind of piggyback on that, and since you opened the door, we'll just walk through it here. So the one thing, Brandon, that I've found just doing my research and prepping for today is, whether it's evangelical or whatever we want to call them, fundamentalist, there's been a lot of quote unquote Christians that have had some pretty nasty and disgusting and potentially hurtful, harmful things that they've had to say, or opinions that they've formed about you. Now, I know how I feel about that, and as one of the atheists, and now in part of the conversation, I think it's despicable, and I think, well, I just think all of them just need to shut the fuck up. Is really how I feel about it, because it's like, who the hell are you?
Yeah.
And if we just want to go back to the old adage that our parents or grandparents taught us: if you don't have anything good to say, keep your damn mouth shut.
Yeah.
And so first of all, just as far as humans, I'm very sorry that any human would say those things, treat you that way, throw those kind of insults simply because you don't believe what they believe, or you do believe what they believe. It just has a different look to it, And so first and foremost, I apologize just as a human being for that. And you fundamental crazy ass Christians, just shut up. Just shut up. Let people live, man. Let people live. Let them find their own journey and their own path, and mind your damn business. Mind your damn business.
Or don't shut up. Keep doing what you're doing and allow people to see you for what you actually are. Because the more people that see that, the more will leave.
Yeah. Yep. I think it's when I say that, there's and I won't name any names, but there was a couple of people that I saw going after Brandon, that they're always the common denominator. That like they always feel like they have to have a voice to be heard, and it's like, no, it's not, like, I'd rather you just shut up, because you've already shown you're stupid.
Yeah.
We can let the rest of the stupid ones show it, but you've proven it. But anyway, enough of my soapbox. Brandon, what was that like for you? When that came out, and the insults and all that came from people that are supposed to be on your team. They're supposed to be on your team.
Yeah, I mean, initially it was obviously traumatic. Again, like, my life from 12 to, at that point, like 20, was dreaming to be an evangelical pastor. Like, so regardless of whether the religion's legitimate or not, like, that was just what I'd been working for. And all these people had treated me throughout that entire journey as, frankly, the golden boy. Like, I was the young, nerdy Bible kid who they all loved, and were like, you're going to be a pastor. We're here to celebrate you. We're here to support you. The moment I asked a question, the moment I became curious about whether I could be gay and Christian, there was all of that love went out the window, which was like a revelation to me that it wasn't actual love at all. It's love in order to get you to do and be who they want you to be. And when I realized that was obviously like the most traumatic thing anybody could go through, to be in a relationship with people who actually have just been lying about what they actually think this whole time. They thought I was going to be the next spokesperson for them in the next generation that they were afraid of losing. And what ended up happening is, as soon as I changed my perspective, even not in a dramatic theological way, like when I was at Moody, I was still pretty conservative. I was just asking some questions about, does the Bible need to be seen as inerrant, without error, in order to be something we look at and study and find value in? That question alone was enough for them to say, you're done. And that was traumatizing. Today, my skin is a lot thicker. The 12-year-olds on TikTok are surprisingly mean. And I've gotten like literal death threats and stuff coming from the TikTok world, which has been an interesting journey. And so I'm reprocessing that trauma. But I mean, the reasons I identify today as kind of an agnostic Christian is primarily because why so many of us leave religion altogether. The people just prove that the belief is not there, that they actually aren't trying to follow the Jesus who said, turn the other cheek, love your neighbor as yourself. Instead, they're more interested in defending their own beliefs, their power, and their privilege. And I don't want anything to do with that. And so, yeah.
I'll say this, and then Bryce, I'm going to hand it off to you for a few minutes because I know you have a few questions that you wanted to ask, and then that way I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to, the one thing you talked about with the relationships in the church when you're walking away, whether it's for reasons similar to yours or reasons like mine, that I was just like, I personally don't have a good reason to believe in this anymore. I found that those relationships, those friendships that you're referring to, it was all convenience based. And what, exactly what you're saying was like, it's either to keep you here or it's, for myself, my brother was the pastor. So I was not only the pastor's brother, but I had different leadership responsibilities and duties. So people wanted to know me just because of that. They wanted to be my friend just because of that. But boy, as soon as I left, they were ghosts, bro. They were ghosts. So it's, I think that's one of the things that, like you said earlier, they do themselves more damage and they do themselves more harm by acting like that and behaving like that than they would otherwise. But Bryce, I'm gonna let you ask a few questions here, and I'll shut up.
Oh, sure. Well, Brandon, I'm curious, what made you interested to do this, to come on here? First of all, have you ever seen this show before?
I've done a little bit of watching over the past couple weeks. So
okay, yeah. What made you interested to come here and talk to us?
Honestly, I think I find myself more and more, especially now that I have the official pastoral role off, I'm a little bit freer to explore and think out loud and be honest about where I'm at on my faith journey. And I found myself in the last 6 months in particular with a lot more affinity with atheists and agnostics. And I don't, and we'll probably get into this, I don't think that I'm going to find myself anytime in the near future in a firm atheistic camp, but I'm also like very open to these conversations. I think they're important. And I think I kind of want to convince, I feel like there's two camps of atheists these days that I've interacted with. There are those who just are very anti all religion, rightfully so. They have great points. I want to help atheists and progressive religious people understand that there are some helpful alliances that we can form ideologically and otherwise that can actually help the world and help combat the toxic religion that is doing the most harm. And so I found that affinity. I think you all are good conversation partners. Conversations aren't as aggressive and unhinged as some other YouTube talk shows. So I think you're a great group of people to talk to. So I'm excited.
I imagine that your openness and willingness to talk to atheists and to find common ground such as that hasn't made you a lot of friends in the Christian community, certainly not in the fundamentalist community.
Yeah, I would say progressive Christians and the whole community of deconstructionists, which is what we're calling ourselves apparently these days. I think there's a ton of affinity with atheists because I think if we're honest, most of us are I think this is the true nature of good, healthy faith or spirituality is you should be hanging on by a thread in some regards. Like I'm open to having these conversations. And so in one sense, I found a lot of affinity there. And there are a lot of people that are like, I'm so glad because I still have the title reverend that a pastor can stand up and say, hey, like, let's engage with these things. Let's consider and be honest about what we think and feel. But you're right, the conservative world can't understand. I mean, they think this is just a trajectory of progressive Christianity. It's pushing you out away from God, and you're going into the deep, dark depths of atheism, which, I mean, it's not untrue, but it's mostly...
I was going to say, do they have a point, maybe?
I think, I mean, again, I resonate with agnostic way more because my understanding, I'm just not convinced either way about whether or not there is or isn't a God. And I can get into it, but like, I just look out at the world, I look at my life, and I sense that there's something more going on here. And I think that makes me curious. And so I've always identified, at least for the past 8 years, as a nomad. That's kind of been my brand. And it's like, I want to constantly be seeking and asking, and I kind of have an allergic reaction to certainty because of my fundamentalist background. So that's why I shy away from kind of the more Richard Dawkins-y versions of atheism that just need to come down hard and say, this is black and white, this is the truth. I want to be a little bit more ambiguous with that. But
so
yes.
Here's how I use the words agnosticism and atheism. I personally define agnosticism as the position of not knowing, or it could be that, or the position that the existence of God is unknowable. I'm more of a soft agnostic. I don't know if there's a God or not. And I consider that a different question than having a theistic belief, or atheism, which is the position of having a belief that there is one. And so I do not believe that there is a God, so I would be an atheist by that measure. But I'm also agnostic. I don't know if there is one or not. I don't even know if it's a knowable question. It kind of depends on the position. So is that how you would be using the terms as well?
Yeah, I think that's how I'm going to use them in our conversation. I like the way that you've used them. I would say I lean on, my suspicion is that there is a God, but I don't know. And like, philosophically, I resonate way more with existentialist and absurdist writers. Albert Camus, I have a big poster of him sitting on my wall in front of me. Like, I'm ready and able to embrace an idea that this is just an absurd thing we're experiencing that has no objective meaning. Like, I resonate with that deeply, and I still can't pull myself away, even as intellectually as I've tried, from just the sense that there's something going on here. And God is probably not even useful language anymore. Lots of people are having that conversation about whether those words are helpful. But yeah, I want to believe, and do believe, that there's, at some fundamental level, order, meaning, purpose behind it all. And so in that sense, I think I would be theistic and agnostic.
Do you still call yourself a Christian, though?
So I wrestle with that. Yes, in the sense that I function within the religion of Christianity. My paradigm is Christian language. The way I teach is rooted in the Bible, because, one, it's been meaningful to me, even though I've deconstructed and see lots of it as deeply problematic. Like, I still think it's a helpful paradigm, especially because my mission has been, for the past 8 years, to help draw people from evangelicalism to a more open, progressive version of faith. And so I need to keep the language there in order to help speak in ways that can actually draw and pastor people towards a more open version of spirituality.
But I guess what my question is, are you pastoring them towards Jesus Christ, for as far as him being the savior, for remission of sins, for salvation and all of that?
The way I talk about Jesus is, he's a radical renegade rabbi from the first century who I think his moral vision is deeply compelling. And I think it's nearly impossible to live, but I think it's deeply compelling. And I think it's better if all people could start trying to live in the same moral pattern that Jesus envisioned. I think the world would be a better place. But do I teach them that he's necessarily divine? No more than I would say that I'm divine and you're divine. If we're going to talk about a God, I think God is the ground of being. And in that sense, all of us are full participants in whatever we're calling God. So,
are you familiar with the actress Katharine Hepburn? She was a popular actress back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. She had a very similar answer, famously, a very similar answer to the one that you just gave about her perspective on Jesus Christ being this perfect role model and this figure that if the whole world could live up to the ideals that he established, it would be a much better place. And she was also very open about the fact that she was an atheist. So that's not really a question, but it's something to ponder. Your answer was almost identical to hers, and she identified as an atheist.
I resonate deeply also with Thomas Jefferson and his Jefferson Bible, where he took out all of the divine and supernatural claims of Jesus and created a book that was actually called The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. And I think that's what I really believe from my historical study of Jesus. I think that's what Jesus wanted. He wanted to create a socio-political revolution that liberated his people, but it was different from the other revolutionaries of the day who wanted to violently overturn the empire. He wanted to do it subversively through these communities of socialism, essentially, where we're all providing for one another. I think that's super compelling and worth thinking about, but I think you can do that without having all the supernatural beliefs or even identifying with Christianity as a religion, though I do. But there are, as I'm forgetting who famously said it, but there are plenty of people who live out the values and teachings of Jesus that have nothing to do with Christianity. And I think that makes them more legitimate Christians than theologically people who are aligned with Christianity.
I might interpret, based on a lot of the answers that you just gave, that you have a non-literalist view of the Bible. So I guess my next question is, how seriously do you take the Bible? How literal do you think it is? And how do you decide which parts of it are true and which parts of it are just stories?
Yeah, so I would say and this is arguable, but I would say I take the Bible the way it was intended to be taken. I have a deeply Jewish, I studied, and my master's degree was largely looking at Jewish interpretations of scripture. And throughout history, Judaism has not claimed that the Bible is the inerrant word of God. It's not hard to determine how to interpret the Bible. Just basic literary analysis skills help you. So I look at the Bible and want to know what's the genre of the text that I'm reading. So Genesis chapter 1, it's a poem. It's a creation poem, a creation myth that's found in dozens of other cultures. So when fundamentalists say, no, this is history and it's meant to be taken as science, it's like, first of all, those concepts didn't exist when the writer was writing this. So you're wrong. But also you're not even looking at the genre of the text. You're not looking at its culture and context and history. And I think when you do that, the text becomes very interesting, even if just from looking at a historical perspective of how humanity has evolved in our understanding of things. I think the Bible is a deeply rich and intriguing text. And whether we like it or not, for better or for worse, much of Western civilization has been influenced by the stories of the Bible. And so I look at it and want to say, how can we utilize these stories? Are they redeemable to change some of the backwards values that the Bible has been used to create in our culture and actually reform them and create, again, a socio-political reality that I think Jesus, as a revolutionary, wanted to bring about?
I want to ask you about, you talked about looking at specific Bible stories and putting them in their context, looking at them the way that they are supposed to be read. I don't know how we can objectively determine that, but we'll just go with it for now. I'm very curious as to how you would interpret Leviticus 20:13. I'm sure you're familiar with that passage. And just for the benefit of the audience, I'll go ahead and read it because not everybody is a biblical scholar. Yeah. It's the verse in the Bible that says, if a man has sexual relations with a man as he does with a woman, both have done what is detestable and they are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. So how do we redeem that particular passage, or is it redeemable?
Yeah, so I'm going to give two perspectives. First, I'll say, on one hand, it can be irrelevant. I mean, this is a purity code from a culture that we don't belong to from over 3,500 years ago. We've evolved. We know more. So that's true. But what I would say also is look at it in its culture and context. What people don't do with Leviticus is Leviticus 18 is actually where it happens twice in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus 18.
Yeah, I actually picked that one because the Leviticus 18 one is essentially saying the same thing, but the Leviticus 21 adds the death penalty to it. So it becomes stronger. It puts more emphasis on just how evil and terrible and punishable it is.
Totally.
But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's good. The context, though, I mean, I think the Protestant Reformation is the worst thing to happen because it put the Bible in the hands of normal people. And you shouldn't give people an ancient text and expect them with modern eyes and no education to be able to interpret it. But Leviticus is actually one that I think is so easy to see its culture and context, because if you go to the beginning of chapter 18, it says that these are God is giving these laws to keep the Jewish people separate from the pagan cultures that surround them. That's literally what it says, that these laws are meant to differentiate you from the Egyptians and the Canaanites. And then the whole set of commands are tied to pagan idol worship. The command before Leviticus 18, I'm forgetting what the exact verse is do not sacrifice your child to Molech, the pagan god. Then a man shall not lie with a man as with a woman, for this is an abomination. The context of that entire passage is temple prostitution. So for the Jewish people, it was don't have sex with men to worship the god Bacchus, which is in the Greco-Roman world, a god that would have male and female temple prostitutes that would come together and have sex. The context is don't do that. That's idolatry. It wasn't primarily the condemnation of homosexuality in that verse. Now, am I saying that Jewish people from that time frame in history would have been cool with gay marriage? No. We'd be hard pressed to find any culture that was. But that verse it's just not an honest use by fundamentalists to say that is talking about loving same-sex relationships that we have in 2021, simply because that's not what the passage is even talking about. It's talking about these practices in relation to idol worship.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I guess you didn't learn that in church.
Oh no, I spent $100,000 getting a master's degree to study and learn that.
So did they in the school that you went to that you almost got kicked out of, did they teach you that this particular passage from Leviticus was about temple prostitution and not about homosexual relations?
No, my master's, I went to Iliff School of Theology, which I think is one of the best religious schools in the country. It's very progressive, interfaith. And that's where I learned about real biblical criticism and how to historically understand the culture and context. And
right. And I guess the only point I was trying to make is you don't learn these things about the Bible in church, and you don't learn them from Bible schools that are really religious schools teaching religion. They don't teach that. Do you think they know it?
Yes. Quick anecdotal story here. N.T. Wright is one of the biggest New Testament scholars in the world today. Evangelicals worship him. We used to be okay friends, and I was talking to him about homosexuality one time because he's the world's foremost scholar on the Apostle Paul. This guy, he has a ton of very progressive views about who Paul was and how to interpret the text. And I asked him, I said, like, you know the body of history related to Romans chapter 1, which is another condemnation of homosexuality. And you know that this isn't an actual condemnation of homosexuality. Like, you understand this. And instead of answering to me, he literally handed me a photocopy of some pages from this backwater theologian that nobody respects, his interpretation of the passage. And that little gesture was him revealing to me his own intellectual dishonesty, I think. It was actually, he wasn't willing to actually engage with the history that was there and that I know he's read. Instead, he pointed me to Robert Gagnon, who's this anti-gay theologian, and said, here's an argument that you should look at. And it's like, why
don't look over there or look over here, right?
Yeah, not willing to engage. And it's, I think a lot of scholars, if you're a serious biblical scholar, and there's a few of them in the evangelical world, you have to know these things are true. And you have to be choosing not to engage because it'll cost you your career and everything else.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more question about the Bible, and then I'll move on to something non-biblical. But yeah. I have to know, because you you put Leviticus 20 and its particular context within the Jewish culture and talked about how it was meant, to separate them from the heathens around them, so to speak. I don't think you used those words, but that's what you were getting at. I want to ask about 1 Corinthians 6 and verses 9 through 10. I'm reading from the King James. It doesn't matter where we get it from, but I chose the King James on purpose because I think it makes the point a little bit better. Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, covetous, drunkards, revilers, or extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. Now, this is written by Paul. Paul was a Jew who essentially became a Christian and started teaching this to the Church of Corinth, at least. So, how much of what Paul says here is accurate? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? Is it a mistranslation? How do you reconcile that one?
I would say on that verse, I actually agree with Paul, because the two Greek words being used there are arsenokoitai and malakoi. Malakoi is one translated as effeminate, and arsenokoitai is a word that Paul made up. It did not exist in the Greek language until he wrote it in that passage. There are 20 so words for homosexuality in its various forms in Greek. Paul doesn't use that word. That word, arsenokoitai, is a transliteration from Leviticus. So arsen means bed, koitai, arsen means man, koitai means bed. And so it's taking it from a man shall not lie with a man as with a woman, and he makes a new Greek word. So whatever Paul's referencing there is the same thing that's being referenced in Leviticus. And what was happening in Corinth, I've been to Corinth on a biblical studies trip, and in the center of the city is something called the Acrocorinth, and there's a temple to the goddess Aphrodite. And in that temple, women would offer sexual sacrifices to the goddess, and men would offer sexual sacrifices to the goddess. And in the Roman culture, older men would have sex with younger boys as a way of like welcoming them into adulthood, essentially pedophilia and rape. And what Paul is actually condemning there, I really believe, based on the context and the words, is this rapist behavior that was happening surrounding this pagan temple in the middle of the city. And imagine if people had translated that correctly, not with homophobia and bias, and would have condemned child sexual abuse with that passage, which is what I think it is condemning and what I think Paul meant, rather than making it about homosexuality. How much of the sexual abuse scandals that we've seen throughout Christianity might have been at least avoided or more sternly dealt with if that would have been translated in the way that I think it was clearly meant to be translated.
Well, I hate to relate the child sex abuse scandals. I hate to use that as a segue to start asking you about the Catholic Church,
Okay.
but I'm going to.
Yeah.
Just as a matter of convenience. You mentioned a little while ago that you think that one of the biggest problems Christianity had was with the Protestant Reformation, and that how they've been able to interpret the Bible in such a way to allow them to abuse homosexuals and really everybody of the LGBT community. But what about the Catholic Church? That this predates the Protestant Reformation. They are the ones that actually had the Bible commissioned, and it's translated in that way. Certainly the Catholic Church is not accepting of homosexuality either.
Yeah. So
is the problem, I guess, is the problem really the Protestant Reformation, or is it just Christianity?
Fair point. Okay. So I'll give my answer to that is I think the Protestant Reformation is the best and worst thing to happen to Christianity. The worst part is that it put the Bible in the hands of average people. The best part is that it puts the Bible in the hands of average people. You're right that up until the Reformation, before there was a printing press, Bibles were few and far between and were only being read and studied by priests, which allowed the Catholic Church to tell people that this is what the Bible said, whether or not the Bible said it or not, whether there was good arguments theologically for a belief. People just had to accept it because the priests were the only people with the Bible. When the Protestants gave people Bibles, well, now there was free thought and debate, and you see why a million denominations formed after the Reformation, because people were able to begin forming their own conclusions. That's wonderful. But the other problem is that the Bible's not a book you would not give somebody Homer's Odyssey and just say, read this with no culture, context, or understanding of what it is. Any ancient text needs to be dealt with seriously from a literary perspective, from a historical perspective. And I think that's where the Reformation screwed things up, because everybody thinks they're a Bible scholar, but no one's actually ever studied the Bible seriously. The Catholic Church, Christianity, I believe, was forever destroyed at Emperor Constantine's coming into Christianity. Up to that point, there were legitimate debates, and a very social, political version of Christianity existed. And we began to see, when Constantine gets involved, he calls the first council together. And the emperor brings together these followers of an anti-imperial rabbi, Jesus. He calls them together and he says, let's decide what Christians should believe. And that's what the councils were. And so imperial power and these bishops now decide this is what all Christians need to believe. And he has the backing of the empire and the military might of the empire to make people believe that. And then Constantine also began to intersperse with this Christianity pagan worship. And so the Catholic Mass draws a lot of the rituals from pagan temple worship. And we see that happening at Constantine. And Christianity is born, what we know as Christianity. Before that, it was this movement within Judaism that was primarily, I would say, a progressive social political movement within Judaism at the time. It was a reform movement. Constantine's the one who takes it, creates it into an imperial force, gives it a doctrine and theology. And that's where the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, which is a contradiction in terms because Catholic means universal, but the Roman Catholic Church is born out of the Roman emperor deciding essentially what Christianity should be, even though he wasn't a Christian himself. And he has this very, most historians would say, bogus conversion story of seeing a hero in the sky and all of a sudden he's a Christian, but like he was just a smart emperor who knew how to utilize a religion that was becoming popular to gain strength and power. Anyways, I have a lot of thoughts about that. So
no, you're fine. Why did you decide to become a pastor?
Well, back then, when I first decided to become a pastor, it was because despite the fundamentalism and how harmful so much of it was, the message that I heard as a young boy, that there was a God who loved me, cared for me, had a purpose for my life, that was something I needed. Even, I think from an atheistic perspective, we can acknowledge that there's an aspect of religion that can be a psychological crutch for people that's very helpful. And it was for me. I needed that. And so
yeah,
I wanted to
I can actually vouch for that just from my major is psychology, and that is an objective fact that, you know, people use religion as a coping mechanism, and various religions, you know, the ones that aren't forced into it, but the ones who actually choose to adopt certain religious principles, they do so because it's helpful to them, yeah. Irrespective of the truth of the claims associated with the religion.
Totally. And it was that experience, right, of, wow, that really did give me hope. And I've become, like, I'm the first not to tout this stuff, but I'm the first person in my family to get a degree. I'm the first person in my family to move out of Maryland. I'm the first, like, and I attribute that to this message that helped give me a degree of self-confidence and an idea of inner purpose and value that allowed me to get above the circumstances of my community growing up, which was alcoholism and drug use and not going very far in life. And so I wanted to help other people experience that. I would have described it as the power of the gospel back then. Again, now I see it differently. And I still am a pastor. I still probably will end up leading a church someday in the future again. And I still like write and speak about Christianity because I still believe, both on the socio-political side, that let's call people to the values of Jesus and see what happens. And in my agnosticism, I've never been able to shake, for whatever reason, the sense that I'm deeply loved by God and that we are deeply loved by God. And that message whether it's because of my own psychological needs or whatever, has been so helpful to me. It's the darkest periods, even in this more liberal phase of my life. And I've seen it help people when I pastored my church. And so, again, I'm more open to talking about it from a psychological lens, even if it is just giving people a psychological coping mechanism. It seems like one that, if it's done from a progressive and healthy way, that can be very helpful. I want to get rid of all the stuff that causes shame and fear. But if you can understand that there's an objective purpose and meaning to your life, and that helps you rise above circumstances, like, I'm all for that. And I've never been able to shake it from my own experience. So I'm still committed to helping others with that.
Do you think it's possible for people to rise out of despair and negative situations with a subjective purpose and meaning to their life that they apply?
Yeah.
So you don't need an objective one, like what would be offered through religion necessarily.
No, I think, and there's something interesting about humans, that some people gravitate towards that religious truth and some people do very well without it. And again, like I said, I flirt with Albert Camus all the time. I'm like, there's something deeply compelling to me and beautiful about kind of like the picture on my wall, I wish I could show you, is of the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus pushing his stone up the hill endlessly, and it only to fall back down, as a metaphor for life. And it's like, the quote is, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." The idea, you make your own meaning. We all know this is absurd, but you just got to keep doing it and finding joy and purpose. That's compelling to me. I'm just, for some reason, not able to make that full leap. Maybe one day I will, but I still have this sense that there's something beneath all of this, and that's,
yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
So let me, and forgive the crassness of this question, and you can answer with a simple yes or no, or you can choose to elaborate if you choose to. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask this. Did your choosing of Christianity, or deciding that this particular God model was true or likely to be true or convincing, or really, I guess, did your decision to become a pastor, did that have anything to do maybe with you realizing that you were gay?
I know where, I get where you're going, because I think that is the truth for a lot of people. I'll tell you this. At Moody Bible Institute, I found out over the past 5 years, however long I've not been there anymore, that a large portion of those studying to be a pastor are gay or trans or queer. And I think there's something there. I know so many Catholic priests that are gay. Like, once you're in the clergy world, you start seeing and understanding, and this is a reality. I think there's something, like, again, psychologically, whatever, that predisposes LGBT people, and perhaps gay men in particular, towards pastoral ministry, because it's nurturing. It leans into those more quote unquote feminine gifts, and it gives an outlet for that that's legitimate and honored in society. And so I think I've seen a lot of that happen in my world as a pastor. I don't think for me that's what drove me. I really do think it was the psychological strength that Christianity gave me, and that really, I don't think I can overstate how messed up I was as a young teenager, and how I was having panic attacks every day, and it was my faith that got me through that. But once I came out, I didn't become a pastor until a couple years after I came out. And I did that because I think it's important that people recognize in religious positions of authority that they need to be able to see that queer people and people who are open and honest intellectually, and all sorts of other people, can stand in this space and make room, whether or not the institutions want it or not. So I'm rambling on that now, but
no, you're good. I'm curious, what do you think the biggest hindrance? You talked about being an advocate for LGBT rights. Obviously, you are. What do you think the biggest hindrance to LGBT rights, at least in the United States, is?
Religion.
Okay.
so stunningly clear to me. My work, what I do normally in non-COVID times, is I sit in rooms with evangelical megachurch pastors and like try to help them see, not through theology, but through like empathic understanding and through science, that LGBT people are normal and that they can actually make this shift and they should make this shift. And I've interacted with so many religious leaders who, again, know these things. These people aren't idiots. They're not, most evangelical leaders are not unintellectual people. They just choose to set what they know to be true aside, either because they're so indoctrinated and believe they need to uphold these truths because heaven and hell are on the line and everything else can fall by the wayside, or because they've come to realize that they've built these empires, and if they shift on this, it's become such a linchpin of an issue that everything falls apart, and there's political power tied to it. And so I think religion stands in the way of LGBT rights, conservative religion, because it's so tied to that opposition and the opposition to abortion and a couple other issues. Like, this has become what American Christianity looks like. Evangelical Christianity, but and I think that is literally what's stopping most of the senators down the street at the Capitol from moving on this issue, because they're afraid of what the religious community is going to say and how they're going to respond.
I got a quick true or false question for you.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
True or false? Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
How are you going to do me like that? Oh my goodness.
And you don't have to answer true or false. You can answer however you wanted, but I did that on purpose.
Yeah. I mean, you know the argument. I mean, fear there is meant respect, honor of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So I really do believe that Jesus's conception of God that he talked about, 1 John is one of my favorite books, where it says fear and God are the opposite, and fear of judgment means that you don't know God if you're afraid of God's judgment, because God doesn't judge. And so my conception of God, if there is a being that's intelligent out there that exists, most certainly can't be something we should have to be afraid of, and most certainly doesn't want us to be afraid of it. If we're going to believe in a God, if we're going to conceive of a God, the God's fundamental nature must be love. And I believe perfect love casts out all fear. And I think that's the biggest spotlight that you can shine on evangelical Christianity and fundamentalism in general to show its inauthenticity, is that it's so fear-based. And if it's fear-based, according to the Bible, it cannot be of God. It cannot be of God from a New Testament perspective. So
I have to say, Brandon, I was all prepared to come at you pretty hard with some additional questions, but the conversation didn't go in the direction that I thought it would. And I'm glad it didn't, actually, because I think I had a certain preconception about you before I heard your story, before I heard some of your answers, that turned out to be not the case. When someone says, hey, we're having a gay Christian pastor come on the show, Oz literally did this. Would you be interested in co-hosting that show? I said, oh yeah, I've got some questions for this guy. But it turned out your responses threw me for a loop. And I think it's worth considering. I guess my last question for you is, because you've kind of indicated that you have more of an agnostic stance, but you still believe there is something. Do you think that whatever God may exist, why would he have such a hands-off approach to dealing with some of the LGBT issues that are associated with the church, in his name? I guess in other words, why would God lead so many Christians and Jews and Muslims and anyone else who believes in a version of God to think that gay people ought to be going to hell? Why would God do that?
I don't believe in that God. Okay. If there's a God that exists, it's not apparent to me that the God has the power to intervene in the affairs of humans. And you might be able to press me on that, and I might retract that in certain circumstances. But I would not say that the Bible is a product of God at all. It's a product of humanity. And I'm fine with people saying it's inspired by God in the same way that I can be inspired by a sunset, and I can be inspired by good music. So if there's a God out there, people can be inspired to write about that God. And I think there's a lot of passages in the Bible that are that, but I don't think that the commands of the Bible necessarily, we shouldn't be talking about them as if they were dictated by a God. If they were, and any evangelical who finds this is going to now crucify me for saying this, but
hopefully not literally.
Yeah, that's not worthy of worship. That God, whoever the God is that's commanding genocide, fuck that. Like that's not something we should be even trying to intellectually wrap our minds around. That's inexcusable. And if that God exists, we're in big trouble as humanity. So, anyways.
I agree. Fuck that.
Me too.
Well said. Anything else, Bryce? I didn't want to.
I guess just what do you think your future prospects are for another job in a church after this interview?
Yeah, well, no, I think surprisingly, there's a lot. The progressive religious world is growing, and the thing is, 75% of the pastors I hang out with probably would agree with 99.9% of everything I've said here, and say this, and it's not a secret. Like they say this to their congregations. The Episcopal Church, for instance, has historically been filled with people like John Shelby Spong, who was saying 20, 30 years ago, all of this. Greta Vosper, who's a pastor in the United Church of Canada, came out as an atheist 3 years ago, made international news, and is still the pastor of that church, kind of from the same perspective, like the ethical teachings of Jesus. And you don't need theism to believe in that.
Are you familiar with the Unitarian Universalist churches? Yeah. Okay.
And I got my eye on them too. I love, this will probably ruin my job prospects with them, but I'll say this. Unitarians on paper look incredible. Like, read their website. I'm like, I am that. I believe in all of that. Go to their church services and they are boring. And so I don't know that I'm an evangelical at heart in the form. I want church to be engaging. I want there to be some emotion involved, even if it's merely for psychological relief. So
maybe that's not a reason to deny you. Maybe that would be a reason for them to hire you if they're looking to expand their congregation.
You should write a letter of recommendation. That'd be super helpful.
I was about to say, from a business standpoint, it sounds like a great opportunity. Go in there and start to help to reframe the culture, so to speak.
UUA, hire me, please.
No, so just a few things there. While I was backstage listening, taking notes, everything. First of all, Bryce and Brandon, great conversation.
Yeah,
that was awesome. And I just have a couple because I agree with Bryce from the research I did. I was like, I'm probably gonna poke some holes here or poke some holes here, and it did go a different direction than I thought. I thought in a good way, than I thought it would. But the one thing I still find myself wondering, Brandon, is if there's the agnostic part of the Christian, so agnostic Christian, and you said several times in your conversation with Bryce that the Bible wasn't written to be an inerrant text or a group of scriptures to be that every dot and tittle is meant to inspire you and move you and fill you. Why do we need it? Why do we need the God? Why do we need the book? Why do we need any of that?
Yeah, great point. I think what humans need from an anthropological perspective is myth and story and ritual. Like, regardless of what culture, we all have that, even in the modern era, even in the atheistic world. Like, I was just having a conversation last week with an atheist who was like, we need new myths and forms. Let's get rid of the Bible and create new ones. I'm all for that. Do that. Humans need some way, we gravitate towards wanting to place our lives in some sort of narrative to give it meaning. And I feel like that's always going to happen. So in some sense, religion's always going to exist. I think the reason I still stick with the Bible is because, one, it's what I know. It's how I've learned to see the world since I was 12. And I think there are helpful ways to reframe the Bible and actually put it in its historical context. That I just led a Bible study, crazy enough, for 17 weeks that ended on Thursday through the Gospel of Mark. And just doing a historic study on Zoom with folks through that, like, it's an amazing text. Like, you don't have to believe it. You don't even have to think Jesus existed. But like, as a piece of literature, when you see what Mark is doing and like there's subtle literary things happening there, like, it's inspiring. It was fun to read. There's like really cool insights. And so I still believe in that sense. I'm willing to acknowledge that the Bible, there's something mysterious about its ability to have layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning. And I'm interested in playing with that. Do I think other people need to adhere to it? No. Do I think most people should adhere to it? No. I think we should find the narratives, the structures, the rituals that make sense for us in our lives. And for me, that's the Bible for now. And but I'm not evangelizing others who are not interested or don't find it helpful or who have been harmed by the use of the Bible. Give it up. Don't hold on to it. There's no need.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up. And before I do, because I forgot to say it when I first came on, everybody, we're getting ready to go into Q&A here in a second. So start putting your questions in the chat area, and we'll get to them here in a few. And I know everybody thinks it's just a running joke, but the super chats are activated, and they do help because I see them better. I have terrible vision, so if I see big bright colors, I know what to look at. So
I'm going to start using that excuse too.
So Brandon, then if we could prove that is true or would be true, that psychologically that we need to have the fiction or the wonderment, I guess, of the myth, couldn't we? Because I would still agree as an atheist, there are a couple of things that I can still take from the Bible and say that these could be used in a healthy way. Like one of my favorites to go to is Proverbs. In the multitude of counsel there is wisdom. And as a business guy, I love that one. And I do think that's good wisdom that anybody can use. But then when we go from the macro view and we go to a 30,000 foot view and we see the damage, trauma, the abuse, the scandals that have been done, in the name of that book. And obviously the book didn't do it, but the people use the book to justify or at least justify themselves and making themselves feel like they're still doing the right thing. Shouldn't we be challenging each other to find a different book or a different mythology or a different something that isn't causing so much pain?
Yeah. I'd say yes. I think it's a both and I'm open to disagreement here too. Just the truth seems to be the Bible's not going away anytime soon, just because it's so rooted in so many cultures around the world, either because colonizers took it and forced it onto cultures, or because it's emerged from cultures and whatever. So I think there needs to consistently be people reforming from within and people outside saying, like, I want you all to go create the better narrative, create the new thing. And when that comes along, I'm happy to jump ship and like say, this is a better way of talking about the world and life and meaning or whatever. But until culture has gotten to that point, if it gets to that point, I think there needs to be people within the biblical tradition saying, hey, the way that extremists are using this, I, again, really do believe is inaccurate historically. I believe it's coming from a place of deep dishonesty, and there are actually helpful, healthy, good ways that the text was meant to be used. And I think, especially, look at Judaism. I really like pointing people to modern Judaism. Judaism emerged from the same Bible that fundamentalists use from. Modern Judaism, modern Reformed Judaism in the US, is one of the most progressive, forward-thinking, on the leading edge of social reform. It's coming from that same tradition. How have they used their own book in a way that's led them there when fundamentalists are doing the same thing and it's leading to a fundamentally different place? Like, that should make us be interested and say, what are we doing wrong using their book to get to these crazy conclusions? when they're following their ancient tradition and they're arriving at this place of incredible progress, incredible open-mindedness. That's something I'm interested in.
It's and that's as a atheist, when I deconstructed, you know, my belief and my faith, you know, through the lenses of Christianity and the Bible, that was one of the first things that really caused the wheels to start to fall off. When I started to really study and realize how many different interpretations there are, how many different denominations there are, and how is it if, you know, if this is supposed to be for this, you know, this mono God that knows everything and all this, how are we all so confused right now? Like, you know, we got people over here that hate people for any reason that they feel like they can point out in the book that they should be able to hate them. And then we got people over here that just love everybody, you know, and it's like, what, you know, how the hell did we get here?
You know, I have to say that I think that the moral arguments are good arguments to lead someone out of Christianity, but I never thought they were good arguments to lead someone out of theism. And the reason I'm an atheist isn't because of any of the moral issues with the Bible. It's because of I don't have evidence or good reason to believe that there is anything supernatural or anything like that. And so the way I look at it is it's like when our children think that Santa Claus is real, right? It's fun for a couple of years, and then they find out that there's no such thing as Santa Claus. But it's useful in that it provides a little fun, entertainment. You can tell them that Santa has a special list. You know, he's checking it twice. If you were naughty or nice, kind of keep kids in line with behavior, right? And so it does have its purposes, but then there comes a point where you want them to start embracing reason and logic and evidence and science and things like that. And you would never intentionally compel them to believe that there was such a thing as Santa Claus or that magic was real or anything like that. And it just seems to me that religion kind of keeps people stuck in magical thinking. You know?
Yeah, I would generally agree. But one of my mentors is a very well-known philosopher in a very unique field. His name's Ken Wilber, and he writes about integral theory. And he released a new book maybe 4 years ago called The Religion of Tomorrow, and it's 900 pages long. He's not a Christian, not religious at all, but he posits this idea that religion, because of the forms it gives us, myth and moral and all these different things, like there's a way in which religion can be a tool to actually help people evolve and grow. Fowler writes about this in his Stages of Faith from a psychological perspective. Carl Jung wrote about this as well. Like there's a way in which when religion is used rightly, it moves people from mythic, magical thinking up this evolutionary timeline in how they think to what Ken Wilber would call an integral worldview, which embraces science and reason, but also still says, and I understand that there's a role for mythology and a role for like a way to bring all that together. I think that kind of religion is what I'm interested in participating in, the one that's able to just try to hold all of this together. But you're also right that there's a legitimate question to be asked. If Christianity, if we're weighing the moral goods versus moral bads that it's contributed to in the world, I mean, they come, I would say they come fairly close, but that's not good enough, right? Like if we're really supposed to believe that this is of God, the good should outweigh the bad. So I don't think Christianity as the religion is of God. I don't think Jesus would be a Christian if Jesus was alive today. I just so happen to have been born into an era and found my religious identity within this religion of Christianity. And so I feel an obligation from the inside to try to reform and press up against things and see if there's any possibility for redemption and healthy versions of spirituality to emerge from it. And it's an experiment. I think there is where I sit right now, but
fair enough. And I would just make a quick correction to something you just said. I think that if we expected God to be good, then we could see that, you know, Christianity, or at least as it's traditionally taught, doesn't live up to that. But that's only if you expect a God to be good.
Right.
There's nothing that says that a God has to be good. That's just the God that you believe must exist, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's all I got.
No, that's great. And just to, I guess, from my point of view, put a pin on that. It's the religious part of all this that fucks it up, right?
Yeah.
Because I was just telling Pasta Mike the other day, we were talking about some things similar to this. If you take religion in and of itself, let's say it's a physical thing. If we took religion and set it on a table in a box, it's not going to do anything all by itself. It's never going to get out of the box, right? It's when humans start to unpackage the religion and use it and manipulate it and turn it into this disgusting, nasty, harmful, abusive thing that now it's turned it into this monster, and that's what it's become, all over the globe. Now, some places are worse than others, and that's why, in appreciating, Brandon, even in your quest to try to, or even a project, is there a better way to do this? Is there an improved way to do this? And I would say, as long as we have flawed humans involved in this process that want to get their hands on that because they know they can use it for power, for wealth, for manipulation, I don't think we're ever going to agree, because that book is used as the tool. That book is used as the way to manipulate, and the words within to capture the minds and the thought lives of people. And unfortunately, there's a lot of them don't even realize that it's happening.
I agree. And that's exactly, like, just one point on that is, that's why I do the TikToks I do. If anybody's ever seen them, is I intentionally say what people, like conservative, say that I'm just trying to get attention. That's really not what's happening. I say very shocking things from a religious perspective about the Bible, because I want to help the people that are indoctrinated into a terrible way of understanding the Bible and what it is and how it should be used, into like thinking deeply. So I did a TikTok that blew up a couple months ago, where I talked about Jesus being a racist, because there's a clear passage in the gospel where Jesus calls a woman of a different race a dog and says, "I'm not going to heal your daughter because I only heal Jews," is what he says. And we need to be able to grapple with that in an honest way, and not just try to theologize over that and not acknowledge that, wow, this is a deeply problematic passage, especially if you believe Jesus is the perfect incarnation of God. So I want to help shock people into thinking deeply about the Bible. And I think, like in that story, Jesus becomes a much more helpful figure, because in that story, let's say he is racist, the woman confronts him and he ends up changing his mind. What a beautiful image. If Jesus could change his mind about racism, maybe white evangelicals can change their mind about racism. Like, I think there's really interesting ways to look at the text that is helpful. And I want to help shock people into realizing that there are better ways and more helpful ways of thinking about the Bible.
Brandan, I really appreciate you in a way that I didn't before the conversation started. Like I said, I came into this conversation with some preconceptions, and I did not appreciate what I thought was going to be you. But now I do. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your openness. I appreciate your commitment to LGBT equality and your desire for unity. I don't agree with your conclusion, and I think, maybe there's a few more conversations I'd like to talk to you about, but I have to say the conversation didn't go in the direction I thought. My image of you has changed for the positive. So
thank you. And like these are the kind of conversations, so especially between the theist and non-theist community. Like, I'm a big believer. I've always been a big believer. Like, comprehension begins with conversation. If we're actually going to actually do anything generative in the world, this is the kind of space that needs to be created. And so I'm grateful that you all have let me come in and that we're getting to have this kind of conversation. Seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do appreciate the whole platform. We appreciate you coming on here and being transparent and honest. And this was a great conversation. We definitely will, because there's more that I would like to talk about, but I know I'm on, we're all on a time frame. We all have busy schedules. Let me say it that way. So respect that. But I am just yes or no, and we can even dig into this next time that we chat. And this is more of me being selfish question, because you've brought up the word myth a couple times. I love that word. Do you believe Do you believe that Jesus actually walked to earth, or do you believe that the life of Jesus is a myth?
I do. I've studied deeply, and I think Jesus mythicism is deeply interesting to me. I think a scholar that I'm sure you know that I appreciate, who actually went to my Bible college, Moody Bibles, Bart Ehrman.
How did I know you were going to say him?
Yeah, I love Bart. And he comes to the conclusion after his lifetime of work on this that it's certain that Jesus of Nazareth existed as a historical person. We have about as much historical evidence for him as we have for Plato and Socrates and other people. So I do think Jesus existed. Now, does that mean, I think, for instance, another great book you should all look at if you're interested in this, there's a book called Demythologizing Jesus, and it shows that the Gospel of Mark was written by somebody who literally copied Homer's Odyssey, and there's a parallel literary structure, and Mark takes the life of the historical Jesus and the teachings of the historical Jesus and plugs them into the Odyssey structure in order to turn Jesus into a Greek epic hero for a Greek audience. And so I have no problem saying like the Gospels contain mythologized accounts of what Jesus did. I think another mentor of mine, John Dominic Crossan, is one of the leaders of something called the Jesus Seminar, and they've done a lot of work to find out which statements in the Gospels are authentic from Jesus of Nazareth and which were later developments. And there's a lot of historical work that's gone into doing that. So all that to say,
and also which writers of Mark, whether Mark had one writer, multiple writers, because I think there's a couple of different endings of Mark that are disputed, right? So we don't even know if Mark was one person or not.
Yeah, we know. I just taught on this on Thursday as we concluded the Gospel of Mark. The ending of Mark doesn't have a full resurrection narrative. And actually the best scholars, this sounds ridiculous, but it's true, agree that what probably happened is that rats ate the ending of Mark and the resurrection account. And there's a whole theory for why that's the case. But you're right. Like, we also have to be honest that these biblical texts that we have are not what they appear. And that's not because they were being deceptive necessarily. That's how things worked in first century Greco-Roman world. People would write books in the name of other people. Mark may have never existed. John certainly didn't exist. John didn't write John.
I've never heard rats ate Mark before, but that's hilarious.
Neither did I until I studied it this week. So there you go.
Yeah, that's when we can talk, because there's a couple of our theist friends that hang out and that we all have conversations on a almost daily basis at this point, and they get so irritated because I'm to the point where I just don't even believe the dude ever was here. Like I don't have good reason, and they hate it. They're like, no, there's more. What you just said, there's more evidence for Jesus than there was boom boom, and I'm like, not really, not when you really start to dissect it. But let's save that for next time. Let's save that for next time.
I would love that conversation.
So everybody, we're getting ready to go to Q&A. And then wrap it up. We're at the 124 mark. So last 5, maybe 10 minutes, we'll do questions. But before we do that, one last time, Brandon, go ahead and plug your website and anything else you got coming up here. Yeah,
the easiest way people can find out about anything is brandanrobertson.com. My name is spelled weird. You can probably see it on the screen, Brandan, Robertson.com. That has all my books, all my social media, all of that stuff. And I have a new book coming out next year in January that I just finished up that I think could be interesting, where I use Jesus and his social and political vision to critique and give a path to white evangelicals to own their own privilege and use it for the good of others, for LGBT people, for Black and brown communities. And so that's the kind of work I'm trying to do, is to utilize the tools of Christianity to help lead to social renewal and social change. And I think some folks in this audience might be interested in that. So check that out.
Awesome. Yep. So my last question, we'll go to Q&A here. Brandon, have you ever saw the inside of a murder shed before?
What in the hell is that? No.
Well, hello, everybody.
What's up,
How's it
Steve?
going, Bryce, you handsome devil?
Oh, yeah, I tried. I tried.
Hey, Oz, I got a question for you.
Shoot.
Did you know that the Canadian legal system is far different than here in the States?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah. For instance, a first-degree murder in Canada would actually be a 34th degree murder in the United States.
I want to know where on the dark webs you go to get these damn jokes.
The dark webs of my own mind.
And I do have
or
to
the algorithm on Google.
That's probably search history based. But Steve, I have to say Brandon's reaction to my lead-in question might be the best reaction so far.
Yeah, it was perfect.
It was priceless.
I'm still unsure what's happening right now.
2-year anniversary. This one's going to have to make the cut.
Yes.
Thanks for sticking around that long, you dummies. Anyway, I kind of wanted to touch on something you guys were talking about earlier in the conversation about how a lot of it seems that a lot of homosexuals are drawn to being, at the pulpit. And it reminded me of a conversation that I heard on another popular atheist show. Not sure if it's as popular as the Bryce is Right, but it was actually a former Catholic priest that they had on, and he was a pedophile, attracted to children. Now, according to him, he never acted on those feelings, but
I believe he probably still is a pedophile.
Correct.
Used was as in past tense, but in reality, if he was, he probably is.
Well, according to him, he's attracted to children, but he's never acted on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's a pedophile who is not a child molester, as far as we know.
Correct. Yep, that's exactly the case. So he felt that he was drawn to the pulpit by God because God gave him a attraction that he couldn't act on. So he was not to be married and to become a priest. And I thought that was an interesting perspective on maybe part of the reasons why you see so much of that in the Catholic priesthood. And not that it's necessarily, the church's fault or the religion's fault, but that it draws people like that because they feel like they're not allowed to feel the way that they feel, and that's why they have to, that was implanted by God to give them that path. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, before you answer, Brandon, the reason I asked you that question is because just from my own experience, I once entertained the idea of becoming a minister myself. I'd never spoken about it out loud, but one of my motivations for doing so was that I thought that there was something wrong with me. And I thought that this was something that could keep me closer to God and in the proper relationship and to give meaning and purpose in my life where I would not be able to explore that other aspect of my life. And I assume that the same holds true for a lot of gay Christians and people who are in the ministry. So that was the context behind why I asked it.
Yeah. And rethinking about my own experience, I would say same thing, honestly. When I got to Bible college, my thought was I had dated a girl throughout high school, repressing my sexuality. And I literally believed that if I could get to Bible college, if I could make it past that stage and enter into training for ministry, that I would get a wife, I would never have to think about being gay again. So there is a part of that that's true for me. As far as the Catholic Church, any of the religions that require celibacy, I think that's going to draw people who have any sexual issue that whether it's just socially stigmatized like being gay or something deeper and like pedophilia, like that makes sense. I think that should just be common sense and apparent to people that that's happening. And I think most of the denominations that I'm a part of these days, progressive denominations, like now do really hardcore psychological testing. Before I could get ordination, I had to go through a rigorous psychological evaluation so that they can kind of identify that people are doing this for psychological escape. Well, one, that's not going to be helpful for the community you're trying to lead, and two, it's not going to be helpful to you. So I think that's changing in progressive religion, but I definitely think I know it's the story of so many people who have come into ministry.
Well, I appreciate you guys answering that or fielding that for me. All right, so let's just get right into the actual Q&A. Thanks for being a fantastic guest, by the way. Velocilobster, this dirty, rotten rascal right here, shouldn't even be asking his questions. But they're so damn good. If God was actually against LGBTQ, if he revealed himself to you and it turned out that, he was actually anti-LGBTQ, would you worship him?
Damn.
I have an answer for that after Brandon as well, but I don't want to poison his answer.
Sure.
Yeah, that's hard. My initial reaction is like, I don't want to answer a hypothetical question. That's not true, but that's just an escape out of answering it. So I don't know. I think I'd have a lot of questions for that God, if that God existed, about why this was allowed to become a reality and why it seems unchangeable and unchoosable, and how I'm culpable morally for something I can't change and I didn't choose. But if we're functioning in the paradigm where we all objectively know that a God exists who's going to send people to hell for eternity because they're acting out on sexuality, I think I probably would worship that God, because I don't want to go to hell for eternity, but that's a fucked up God. Like, that's not that's terrible. I hope that's not reality.
I really appreciate your answer here. And I just wanted to say that a part of what I really appreciate about it is that you said, basically what you said is that you would seek further understanding, which is, I think, a great way to approach just about everything. So go ahead, Bryce Aroni.
Yeah, this is an easy answer for me. If we're talking about a God who is fear-based and punishes people for not following him, then it's simple. Of course you would worship him. The problem with that is it would be false worship, because you wouldn't be worshiping out of love. You'd be worshiping out of fear. And if the God is all-knowing, he would know that. So the reality is I would be incapable of worshiping the God the way that it claims that it wants me to worship. I would only be faking it. So is that real worship? I don't know.
You just took us to church, man. That was good.
Oh, thank you.
And if there's a hell involved, if there's eternal torment and punishment involved in any of this, fuck that God.
Yeah. I mean, when you're faced with the prospect of being tortured, you'll do whatever the person tells you to do. If the person asks you to hop on one leg to get, into heaven, you'll do it, or face burning in hell. But would you actually love the character asking you to do that? If somebody's holding a gun to your head saying, give me all your money, if you want to live, you'll give them all your money, but that doesn't mean you're going to love them. You're just going to obey them. So
I have found this to be the case most of the time.
As just a quick side note, doesn't it, like, this gives me a little bit of empathy for fundamentalists, because they really believe that this is reality. And it's not to get them off the hook, but it's like, if you think that this is the reality and that you're going to be tormented for eternity if you accept me, like, I don't know how we have a conversation, because that's messed up.
I had to go to a therapist when I left religion and faith, because of the thought of hell that was drilled into my brain for 30 something years, so that, it's a real fucking thing.
Yeah.
I didn't believe in hell for very long, but go ahead, Steve. I don't want to take over.
I got another question from Caitlin Beyond. I like that name. I've been lurking a while. Adulting? But I have a question for Brandon. He can't shake a feeling, but how much does it matter to you whether your beliefs are true or not, regardless of that feeling?
Yeah.
Good question.
As far as whether or not a God exists, I know some atheists would roll their eyes at this, but I really would say, like, the God I believe in currently is a God that's only going to give me comfort and lead me to do things that are good in the world. And so at the end of the day, like, there is a little bit of a mental tension of like, even if I come to the point where I believe this is not true, it's helpful to me. It's helpful because sometimes, I'm sure we've all had the experience, like when you're laying in bed contemplating existential dread and meaninglessness, sometimes you need something that's going to help you get out of that. And for me, that is, no, there's a purpose, there's a creator, there's something here to help me. Even if that turns out just to be mental coping, it helps. And if I die and there's nothing, it's not going to have hurt me to have believed in this particular version of a deity. So I don't know if that answers it, but.
Oh, it answers it just fine. Because it's your answer.
I love that.
Anyway, Samuel Doolittle, worry not. I will not breach my contract. I did find the perfect question to mispronounce. So don't you worry. Travis Statham has a question. I think that if that's not how you pronounce your name, that's how it is now. Brandon, can you define the word faith?
Faith is the evidence of things hoped for and confidence in things not. Just kidding. It's not.
I was going to say.
Oh, I was about to end the stream. I'm like, we had all this progress. We had all this progress, and he's going to drop Hebrews 11. I'm like,
faith. I think faith is believing in that which can't be proven. I think that's pretty simple. Like I'm frankly not that interested in proving what, again, I'm not interested in proving whether God exists. I'm interested in the conversation, but like at the end of the day, for me, it's helpful, at least right now. And so, so for me, I'm willing to suspend reason, even though I'll give some conservative argument. I think there are some reasonable arguments that can be made for God, but that's a whole nother episode. That's not what's important to me. I'm not interested in debating that. I suspend reason and have faith that something exists.
Sure.
Why are so many Christians afraid to say that faith is blind?
I think that's a new thing. I think that's a result of the fundamentalist modernist controversy of the late 1800s, early 1900s. I think if you read back through like the church fathers, people, I mean, the mystics all loved the idea that faith was blind and it was kind of stepping into darkness. And there's deeply beautiful imagery for that. But when modernism happened, fundamentalists had to react and say that we had just as much answers and confidence and reasons and facts as the evolutionists and all the other folks. And so it became this false construct of the Bible needing to be subjectively or objectively, factually true in every way. And God needs to be reasonable and proven. And it's like, that's not faith. That's not what the point of religion is. You're missing it when it becomes religion versus science. Because
I mean, the Bible doesn't even say that.
Right.
The Bible says faith is blind.
Yes.
Right.
Blessed are those who believe without seeing.
Right. And even
faith, not by
as
sight.
you judge me for Hebrews 11:1, it's a fairly, like, it's a good statement. It's substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. The evidence is the controversial word, but substance of things hoped for. It's the physical manifestation of things that you're hoping exist. And I would say like the feelings, the things that you hope for exist to give you. Like, that's helpful. And you're right. I think that's the biblical understanding of faith, and it should be, but it's not the fundamentalist understanding of faith.
All right, Sam, perk up those ears. Get ready, because this is what you've been waiting for, bud. I got another question from Scott Williams. The Orthodox Jewish rabbits lay out robust... I tried to power through it. Lay out a robust cause for why theologically Christianity is a form of blasphemy or idiotry?
Idolatry? Oh.
Ideolatry?
Idolatry.
How do you respond to this? See, there's a twofer, Sam.
Oh, man.
I love that question. I think it's a great thing. One, I don't care based on how my faith functions, but from a theologian's perspective, this is something most Christians don't grapple with, is that we've essentially hijacked Judaism and created something that's antithetical to Judaism. I think Jesus was deeply Jewish. I think the teachings of Jesus were deeply Jewish. Jesus he was revolutionary, but not all that revolutionary. There were other rabbis of his era that said things like turn the other cheek. Hillel is a famous rabbi that a lot of Jews follow today that was saying things just like Jesus was in the first century. And so I think like the Constantine, when he comes along and we start getting formulations of things like the Trinity, even though I have a Trinity symbol behind me, don't judge me. It's like, that's divorcing that religion that's being created is nothing that Jesus would recognize and nothing that Jesus and his followers recognize. And I think there's legitimate critique from a Jewish perspective to be able to say, like, you all perverted the very faith that Jesus was a part of and created something that the faith would call idolatry, of course. So.
And I've got one more question. It might be, well, I'll just lay it out there. Tech is life feels as though you are cherry picking. And what do you say if somebody were to, do with that or something? What would be your response?
Yeah. So this is the critique that I get from fundamentalists and the critique that I get from, I would say, more extreme atheists. And I would just say, just because fundamentalists' understanding of Christianity are what most people think of today when they think about Christianity, that doesn't make it true, and that doesn't make it the norm. And fundamentalism is not how the majority of Christian history and Jewish history has looked at the Bible. Like, I encourage people, look at how Jewish rabbis through the centuries have engaged with the biblical text. It was in a creative way. It wasn't in a every jot and tittle needs to be followed. It was like, let's explore and find meaning and look at numbers and do all sorts of fun stuff with the text. And so the accusation of cherry picking is an accusation that only comes from the perspective when you're assuming that the proper way to read the Bible is literally, factually, historically as true, which is conceding the fundamentalists' argument, which didn't exist until about 200 years ago. So I would say I'm calling for a deep engagement that's historically rooted in rationality, rooted in literary criticism. And I think if you engage with the text that way, you're going to end up where Reformed Jews end up, being pretty damn progressive and being pretty open and able to be agnostic and all of these good things. I think that's the more authentic way to engage with Scripture.
Well, Brandon, it was really nice to meet you.
Likewise.
And thanks for stopping by the Murder Shed, where answers get questioned.
Looking for a new and challenging opportunity? Do you have previous landscaping, mortuary, or medical experience? Are you available to work flexible hours, including nights and weekends? Are you ready to get involved in a business where you can simply make a killing? If you answered yes to these questions, then the Murder Shed Steve Intern Program wants to hear from you. Registration for the 2021 season is now underway. Contact us today for an information package to get you started. Many valuable perks are available for those willing to reach out and grab them. Qualified participants must agree to have street epistemology applied to anything they say.
All right. Well, we went a little over our normal time here, so be respectful. But one last time, Brandon, thank you for hanging out with us today. You're an awesome guest, and I will email you, and we'll get around to schedule and get into some more of the fun stuff. But Murder Shed, Steve, good to see you back on screen, buddy. Good to have you back. And Bryce, thanks for hanging out with me today. That was Bryce kills it when it comes to the question asking. He's a killer, man. He's a killer. But everybody that's been in the chat, thank you for hanging out with us and being here. Remember, at 9 p.m. Eastern time, sharp. Remember how we do it here, sharp. Just kidding.
We will not be a half hour late.
We'll get started, and we have another Christian friend of ours hanging out. So we'll see you then. Until then, go get something to eat, get a drink, and we'll see you in a few hours.
Turn it up. What up? Yeah. Grab your chair, put up a seat, yeah. just the dudes that you knew for poking holes in all these fables. Yeah. See, we just some atheists that got questions like, why does God kill babies with cancer? Hopefully, you can bring some answers. We'll sit back and take notes. Go ahead. Welcome to the Atheist Roundtable.